Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO Takedowns series. Who is Nintendo suing next? If you haven't seen the news already, you're going to hear it here. Nintendo is now suing Palworld. They filed a notification yesterday on their website stating in a press release that they were suing the makers of Palworld for different patent infringements. Now they haven't published any lawsuit yet, so we don't know what those patent infringements are. We can take some educated guesses at them, but they will be just that, guesses. But of course, as usual, Nintendo is going to the legal team to try to stop something they don't like. And you'll see here, this was published on September 19, 2024, and that date I think is going to be important as we get further on into the video. But it says filing lawsuit for infringement of patent rights against Pocket Pair Inc. That is the parent company of Palworld. And Palworld absolutely blew up when it launched. You're going to get some sales totals later in the game, but they are absolutely in some way, shape, or form eating Nintendo's lunch when it comes to revenue based on a cute game where monsters are involved. And while there's a ton of features in Palworld that have nothing to do with Pokemon whatsoever and actually give you more gameplay elements and of course weapons to shoot, something Nintendo never lets you do outside of Splatoon, both games do bear a striking resemblance to each other, but having a resemblance to a different game does not mean you're infringing on it necessarily. Here's a see here where the lawsuit was filed in Tokyo District Court. I tried to find the paperwork on this, the actual filing doesn't seem to be available yet, so we can't parse through that. Once that becomes available, I can break this down into a little bit more granular detail. But it says the lawsuit seeks an injunction against infringement and compensation for damages on the grounds that Palworld, a game developed and released by the defendant, infringes multiple patent rights. So we have damages and we also have an injunction against it potentially. And you'll see here, this is different than Nintendo taking other things offline like the Heaven Studio mods. This is done under DMCA or Digital Millennium Copyright Act. That is not a patent-based thing. So while Nintendo is still suing somebody over something they don't like, this has no resemblance to any of the other lawsuits on Yuzu emulation or anything else like that. And it says that Nintendo will continue to take necessary actions against any infringement of its intellectual property rights. Now they are saying they're suing under a patent, but they do mention IP, so that is very interesting. And we've gone through the saga of who Nintendo is suing and when a lot on the channel recently, but this doesn't have anything to do with emulation. It is a completely different style of lawsuit. And this news went out hard and fast last night, but people have been talking about Palworld, and Nintendo even released a notification in January saying they were looking into it. So it should be no surprise to the developers of Palworld and the parent company that Nintendo had been looking at this all along. Because back in January, the Pokemon Company released an official statement about the game saying that they intended to investigate and take appropriate measures. Now that is not a tip of the legal strategy hat. That's taken the whole damn hat off and thrown it across the room in your opponent's face, telling them you better watch out because you're 100% looking at exactly what you are doing. And that means when you want to try to find a problem, generally you can find one. If you parse through the game's design, if you parse through any of the code you can find or even reverse engineer, you end up in situations where you can find something to point at to take a legal action against. Does that mean they're going to win in court? It does not, but of course Nintendo really doesn't lose court cases ever, so you can kind of see the writing on the wall here. And it's a really interesting statement to say at a game's launch that they're going to start investigating it, and a direct quote here is, "We intend to investigate and take appropriate measures to address any acts that infringe on intellectual property rights related to the Pokemon." They were stating right off the top, we're going to look at you, and if we want to find something, we damn sure will. But the question is, why did Nintendo wait until September to file this lawsuit? And I think there's two key components to that we'll get into in a little bit. But that is just the interesting thing. Nintendo can't let anything go. Now it's possible that there is something within Palworld that infringes on a patent. It could be as simple as how grass moves, it could be as simple as a day-night cycle. You never know what patents Nintendo has. You can research them, but it's into the thousands. It would be impossible to identify it until they actually reference it in a lawsuit, and we can actually pull that paperwork and take a look at it. And there's different patents, design patents, utility patents, how something looks, how something functions. We don't even know what type of patent they're talking about at this point in time, but there is something very interesting that I was able to find and makes me think, if I had to guess, it could be part of this patent lawsuit once we actually get the text of the lawsuit in and of itself. You see there, these characters are throwing a sphere at their opponents. That's going to become important, I believe, in just a moment. But again, I can't state plainly enough because we don't have the lawsuit documents. I am presuming some things here just to try to explain how patents work, and you can kind of take it from there and see how this could potentially shake out in the future. But again, we're throwing a circular shape at monsters or opponents in the play field, and I think that might have something to do with this, because if we take a look at the patents assigned to the Pokemon Company, and of course partially owned by Nintendo, we can kind of see all the different patents they've been issued. The first one doesn't really have anything to do with this, but I'm just trying to give an example. The gamification of health awareness based on sleep patterns. How something sleeps in a game could be part of a patent lawsuit. But you'll see here, storage medium, storing game program, game system, game apparatus, and game processing method. It's a mouthful of words that don't really mean anything, but if we take a look at the abstract, it's talking about an operation where characters are launched into a space and using an item that affects a field character disposed on a field. What that really sounds like in patent language is throwing a Pokeball at an enemy in the game, aiming it, and then releasing it. So the first part of this patent talks about throwing it into the field at an enemy. The second part, or the second mode of the patent, talks about an aiming direction, a fighting character that fights based on a third operation input. That could be throwing a monster into a space inside of a spherical ball. This is how granular patents get, and this is how vague they can also be, because it does seem like maybe this could be something that Nintendo and the Pokemon Company did not like. The fact that there is a ball that you throw that interacts with monsters, but there's other information in that patent that makes me suspicious of the timing of this September 19th announcement and why it took Nintendo 7 months to decide to actually sue Palworld and the parent company. If we take a look at that patent again, you're going to see the application was filed May 2nd, 2024, and the publication date was August 22nd, 2024. So this is a fresh patent application for Nintendo. If we take a look here at the filing lawsuit notification, it was 1 month later between that patent being published and Nintendo deciding to sue the makers of Palworld. That could very much have something to do with this court case. Additionally, Palworld has sold a metric crap ton of copies. The sales data I could find was from February of 2024, but kind of extrapolating that out and looking at other different data I could find, it seems like Palworld has outsold even some of Nintendo's own games, getting around 30 million copies into circulation. That is not a small number by any stretch of the imagination. It is outselling like 99% of other games that hit store shelves, even if it is something that you probably just downloaded on Steam for 30 bucks. So conservative estimate, sales by price, we're talking about a minimum of $900 million in gross revenue, and I'm sure it's higher than that. Palworld is a $1 billion game at this point in time, and Nintendo looks at that and thinks to themselves, that should be our $1 billion, not yours. Nintendo thinks their bottom line is suffering, and they think it's because another company made a game too similar to Pokemon. But Palworld does a ton of things that Pokemon doesn't, and gives fans a lot of things they've been asking for in the Pokemon franchise for a very long time. And it's not like other games aren't similar to each other. This is something we see all the time. And Palworld did answer to this, stating that they have not even seen of any specific patents they're accused of infringing upon. So honestly, the developers of Palworld don't even know what Nintendo is currently saying they're doing wrong. And patents in games can be very weird. When you play a Namco game, those little mini games in the loading stage, those are patented, only Namco can do that. When you play a Sega racing game and you see a smooth transition between the in-cockpit view and the third-person view where every other game has a hard cut, that's because Sega has a patent on the smooth transition between the different camera views. This can get extremely granular, and until we know what patents Nintendo is referencing, we have no idea exactly what they think has gone wrong. But as the developers of Palworld said, they now have to allocate significant time to matters unrelated to game development due to this lawsuit, and I'm sure that's a little bit of what Nintendo wants to, but the reality, this commenter Luke McCool here got it right. Palworld's 100 times better than Pokemon. This company came into the same space as Pokemon, made a game that most people would consider better, and Nintendo does not like that. Nintendo got outcompeted in design, so now they're trying to use the legal system to blunt the actual progress that somebody like Palworld has made. And I have not played Palworld, so leave me a comment down below and you tell me what you think about it. It really just isn't my game genre, but it's fun to talk about in the guise of Nintendo lawsuits. Or maybe it's something to do with this June 2024 update. Maybe the game was fine until June and they added a system, mechanic, or otherwise into the game that Nintendo now thinks is infringing a patent. Until we get those court documents, it's going to be impossible to say, but it is something interesting interesting to look at because I'm sure Nintendo's probably going to say that the damages here are going to be astronomical. I'm sure they would love to basically bankrupt the developers of Palworld to get them off the market, but my guess is that won't happen. But if you have any questions or comments, so leave them down below. I know we're talking about patent law here, not licensing an IP, but I do have some experience in patents on the design side of things, and I do have my name on one patent with Motorola and Burt, not a jacket I developed one time. But short of that, we're done, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.